In the next hour, we're going to be joined by Kelton Hatch from Idaho Fish and Game. And just keep in mind, Kelton drops by on a monthly basis. And he's also available to take your telephone calls and answer your questions. Got a lot of changes this time of year, obviously in August with the changing of, well, technically the seasons don't change for another month. But most of us know when the kids go back to school, that's really when officially, it may not be autumn, but autumn starts when the kids go back. And summer starts when they get out, even though it isn't at what, June 21st or so, when the calendar says it actually does. I have a lot to talk about in the first hour of the program today, and I'd like to say thank you for joining me. Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310, KLIX and newsradio1310.com. I just finished my little preview on Facebook a few minutes ago, and I'm going to open up talking about some of the same things that I was talking about while I was doing that little 10-minute update. Washington Post, Pravda on the Potomac. I used to be a subscriber to this newspaper back when I lived in the Chesapeake Bay area. Then I moved west and I had no need to do it. And at this point, because the Post has essentially moved the opinion pages over to the front page, I don't know that I would ever subscribe to such a rag ever again. But I still occasionally get some email updates from various sections of the Washington Post, and I saw this story late yesterday morning after I got off air, and I decided to print it out and save it. And the headline is, "The latest overdose outbreak shows just how dangerous the heroin epidemic has gotten." And then I'm going to offer a few thoughts about why I think we're headed this direction and what it might be related to as well. And we're on our way today into a high temperature of about 91. Right now it's 65. It was warm overnight. Most of you may have noticed that if you had the windows open. The Charleston Gazette-Mail, the reporter at the Post says that police in Huntington, West Virginia, responded to 26 heroin overdose cases in a span of 4 hours on Monday evening. Now, Huntington is a city with a population of about 49,000. So it's an eastern version, an Appalachian version, I guess is a better way to put that, of perhaps Twin Falls, Idaho. An overdose outbreak of similar magnitude in a place like New York City would affect more than 4,400 people. I'm just giving you a few paragraphs here. I'm jumping around in the story. I can't read the whole thing, obviously. Well, I could, but I don't know if you want to sit here and just listen to me like being in the fourth grade all over again. The writer says drug overdose deaths have exploded in recent decades. Since 1982, the drug overdose mortality rate has risen by 425%, adjusting for population. Now, that is a huge, huge number. Drug overdose deaths have eclipsed motor vehicle deaths as a leading cause of death in the United States. Now, I didn't think I would ever see that happen in my lifetime. But here we go. And you wonder what exactly is going on. Well, we're 50 years now into a social experiment started by the Democrats and the American left in this country to try to take us away from the things we used to have. I was making a post on our website the other day, and for many, many years, I considered myself a libertarian, and I even said, well, probably we could get away with legalizing some drugs and obviously take the burden off of law enforcement and maybe tax those and help our treasuries out. And what's happened, we've seen that happening around the country. And all of those people out there who say, well, it's not a gateway drug. Maybe you don't get addicted in the sense you do a heroin, a highball of heroin at some point. But on the other hand, people who actually are willing to take drugs generally say to themselves, well, I wonder what this would be like, and I wonder what that would be like. In other words, it reduces your inhibitions, not only while you're stoned, but afterwards too. Once you've recovered, if you recover, it reduces your inhibitions because you think, well, I got through that. Maybe I could try this. And I think there's a lot of that going on. And as I've been thinking about my life over the last 15 years especially, I realize I'm not a libertarian. I'm what's called, and I mentioned this in one of my posts the other day at our website, I'm what's called a paleo-conservative. What does that mean? Well, a neoconservative is someone like Dick Cheney or William Kristol at the Weekly Standard. They believe that America has to be out fighting brush wars all over the planet at great expense, blood and treasure, yours mainly, and that we need to impose our culture upon the rest of the world. And once we do that, the world will be a much more peaceful place. Well, the question becomes, what is our culture compared to what it was 50 years ago? And maybe that's exactly what the rest of the world doesn't want, especially when they have more traditional cultures. So the difference between a neocon and a paleocon, and to give you an example, the best example of a paleo-conservative in America today is probably Pat Buchanan, who is a man of faith. although he's not necessarily, that's not the main point of what he's talking about, but he's a man of very devout faith. And he's also a man who believes the country should not be the police officer of the world. And he also believes we should return ourselves to previous time in this country when people actually went to church and they didn't use a lot of drugs. I mean, when I was growing up, the drug epidemic was just beginning to make its way into small towns. But just a few years before I was born, it was mainly the only people who used drugs were some musicians. And then as musicians became more and more, we used to have a country where great authors and great leaders were the people that were admired, and great military officers who led us to great victories. But by the 1960s, pop culture took over, and all of a sudden, musicians who are simply people who are skilled at playing a guitar, or they were born with a good set of pipes in their throat and can sing well, or are good playing a trumpet, suddenly their abilities meant that they knew everything and that we should be taking their advice. And many of them, of course, grew up in a culture in the music world using drugs and the like, and they started preaching rebellion and drugs. Well, I think the old phrase, sex, drugs, and rock and roll. And with that, they were elevated in our culture, and culturally, here we are 50 years later. We have the number of unwed births in some communities is 70% now, maybe higher. Even among white families, where for years they were still stable, now the numbers are 40, 50%. So people are popping out children left and right with a variety of partners, and there's no family stability any longer. People are using drugs left and right, and now they're dying of drug overdoses and the abuse at record numbers, and even outstripping the number of people who die in car accidents. And while automobiles have gotten safer, those numbers were still quite high. And you see kids walking away from schools who can't read or write, and that's been a problem the last 50 years. And all the liberals do is say, well, give our teachers union some more money. We'll throw more money at it. They'll be happy. And they can pat their bellies when they're well fed, and won't everything be wonderful? And it doesn't work. And yet they make fun of those of us who say, we probably had a better country 50, 60 years ago. Think about this. The greatest thing that I know of my country ever did was between 1941 and 1945. There was a story in the Press Tribune out of Nampa today about a World War II vet. He traveled to Normandy, and he was given an award by the French government while he was there because of his efforts on D-Day. Now, there aren't a lot of those guys left around any longer. And you compare what they went through, they grew up in a depression. If anybody should have been angry at their country and looking for a rebellion and saying enough is enough, but no, instead, after having grown up with rickets and being malnourished and growing up inhaling a silica because of the dust blowing on the Great Plains, they went off and they saved the planet instead because they felt it was the thing to do, the right thing to do. And then you compare that to what we have today. And second story related to all of this, and I think it's just as important, because if you're looking for something that is related, what did sex, drugs, and rock and roll replace in our lives? This is from the latest edition of the Christian Post. In his new book, The End of White Christian America, billed quite possibly the most illuminating text for this election year, Robert P. Jones, the founding CEO of the Public Religion Research Institute, says, white Christian America is dead, and the general election in November could be a referendum on it. There are no indicators that the country will see the likes of white Christian America as a dominant cultural force again, he said. He said white Christians aren't just falling away from mainline denominations like Episcopal, Methodist, or Presbyterian, as some believe, but as well evangelical churches too. In his book, Jones noted that making churches more racially diverse is one way that Christianity can be revitalized in America, but he wasn't available Wednesday to further discuss the point when the Christian Post reached out to him. Jones argued in the interview that white Protestant, they're citing another interview he did, that white Protestant Christians are attracted to Donald Trump because they feel he will restore the power they have lost in the culture war, but this is only wishful thinking. And I believe Trump, by the way, is sincere. I think he's sincere. I just don't know. These problems are so insurmountable. I don't know that if he did become president, that he could turn it around in 4 to 6 years. But I know that's what his hope is, because Trump is a guy who grew up in the 1950s in this country. And the critics out there, and my sister, just to add to that, my sister sent me a link this morning from the Fox News website, about an Air Force colonel who was being brought up on charges because someone was upset because they saw a Bible on his desk. He's being brought up on charges because there happened to be a Bible on his desk. He wasn't opening it and forcing everyone to listen to him as he read it. It happened to be just sitting on a corner on his desk. For crying out loud, they could court-martial this guy. This is the direction we're heading. And if you don't think that there's a sinister plan behind it, clearly there happens to be. Otherwise, we wouldn't be headed for cultural destruction, and all of these people wouldn't be marching off the cliff in places like Huntington, West Virginia, or even Twin Falls, Idaho, because they would feel they had something more important in their lives, and it's gone now. And we've destroyed their faith, and we've destroyed their faith not only in God, but in government and institutions. And here we are today. And I've got to tell you, the critics say, well, you'd like to return us to an apartheid America. I hear that from all of the loudmouth, pompous SOBs over at Morning Joe on MSDNC. And they're referring to one of them, for instance, grew up in South Carolina. And I guess when he was growing up, they had two different drinking fountains and establishments, one for people of color and one for people who are a little bit paler like me. But here's the thing. At least in that era, you had more stable families, especially even in the black community. It wasn't destroyed by what we've done over the last 50 years. We introduced drugs in that community. It's a little bit like what happened in the clearances in the 1800s, when it was decided that we would stick the Indians on reservations and give them a lot of alcohol, and thinking, well, they'll just drink themselves to death, and when that's done, problem solved. That's how a lot of people in America decided they would deal with that issue. It was they thought easier than trying to integrate people or try to find a way to live with these people. And for all those people out there in black America who think the Democrat Party is your savior, there you go. That's what's been happening to you as well. But now they're doing it to white America. And Huntington, West Virginia, in Appalachia, former coal country, they're doing it to white Americans, working class Americans between the coasts. They're now trying to do it to us. They've destroyed our faith. They've destroyed the industries we used to work in. They have destroyed all of the institutions we used to trust. And now they're just handing us methamphetamine and heroin and bags of dope and telling us, go ahead, be like your favorite rock star, who's also making a ton of money off of you. What little you have, you're spending on the music. I've got a short break. Look, I'll take some of your telephone calls on this matter in just a few minutes. Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310. KLIX and newsradio1310.com. It's 65 on our way into the low 90s today. Some Americans believe that they may have found a way to solve this, and that is simply to leave the United States. I'll share that with you in just a couple of minutes. Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310. KLIX and newsradio1310.com. Some people out there try and argue with us and say, too, that Trump isn't the right guy to do this because obviously he's not a man of very devout or deep faith. But there are stories in the Bible about people who were not of the book who came and helped rescue God's people from time to time. So the Lord will use people at times and use them for the right purpose. And as I said, I think he's sincere, if nothing else. 824, Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310, KLIX and newsradio1310.com. I'll get to my callers in just a moment, but I do want to remind people, this may be the last really warm day we have this summer. Well, probably shouldn't say that, but we're not going to have a string of these 90-degree days any longer, at least according to the weather forecast I looked at this morning. Cold winters are right around the corner. Whether you need repairs right away or would like to avoid problems in the future, call the pros at Ramsey Heating and Electric today. The team at Ramsey's are going to make sure that the job is done right the first time. Problem-free, cozy winters found at Ramsey Heating and Electric, 2600 Overland Avenue in Burley. You can telephone them 678-0459. That's Ramsey Heating and Electric, where they sell warm winters and cool summers. We have a caller with us. You're next. You're on KLIX. Go ahead. Good morning. All right. Let's try another line here. Hi, you're on the air with Bill Colley on Top Story.
Good morning, Bill. You know, I think you hit on a topic that is so true, that the left has had a long plan to erode the family. This country was built on a cornerstone and keystone of religion. And as they slowly chip that away, the faith part of it eroded and immorality came in. And when that happened, everything is going by the wayside. The thing is they've done this over a long period of time, but even their own culture is caught up, and it's a now culture. Everything has to happen right now. So we're seeing it just accelerate before our eyes. And I don't care. One president is not going to turn around 50 years of rot. It's going to take some time, but it's going to take all of us to stand our ground and stop saying, okay, we're Christians, we're going to let everybody else do what they want. And that's, we got to stand for our rights as well as anyone else's rights.
And sure, and I thank you for the call. The Christian world has to actually get out there. The fact that we are seeing a drop in the number of evangelicals doesn't mean that they should give up. Because I think that we're going to get to a point in this country, likely within the next 4 years, 4 to 5 years, where people are going to be yearning for something because you're not going to be able to rely on government any longer. 2008, I'll get caller, be patient. 2008, because I got this in my mind, it just shot into my mind, I got to mention it. Right after the financial crisis, well, just before it began, we had a huge spike in gasoline prices, $4 and something per gallon. And I was at church one day, and the pastor said, he pointed to a gas station across the street, and he said, you see that? If that continues, you're all going to learn that there's something you can put your bedrock faith in, and that's God, not necessarily your automobile. Well, now that's an interesting statement. Caller, you're on the air on KLIX. Go ahead.
I just wanted to share, Bill, how much support I have for what you shared and the caller that just spoke on the phone. This situation that we're in has been obviously prophesied in the Old Testament, but 20 years ago, a little over 20 years ago, David Blankenhorn, a great researcher, wrote a book called Fatherless America. And he looked at all the different civilizations that were great and that had, and still are looked at as incredible societies. They're all gone. And as he reviewed and went through what literature was left of those cultures, he found that their destruction, their complete annihilation from the earth, resulted when the immorality and the loss of family integrity took place in their culture. And he warned, this was back in 1995, he warned of his fear of what road America was on. And just as you reported, we are headed down that road unless we all stand up and speak together and stand strong in establishing and restoring the integrity and the family unit as the primary focus of the country.
Absolutely.
I just wanted to add that.
Thank you. That is the bricks and mortar of America right there. There is and I had so little time. Caller, be patient. I'll get to you in the next segment of the program because it wouldn't be fair in the last few seconds to put you on the air and then have to cut you off for the break. But there is a story that I remember reading a few years ago about a culture that had been a very, very adept and almost modern culture a few thousand years ago in the territory now known as New Mexico. And then something happened in that culture. And they've discovered, too, by the way, when they went in there and they started looking in the old wells, they found the bones of children in there. Little children, young children. Think about abortion in this country and all of the dead. In other words, we're sacrificing generations, and to what? To Baal? And they went in and they found that obviously when this culture was dying, they started killing off the children as well, so there would be no continuation, and it all just fell to the pieces. When all of a sudden you have no respect for your own children, that means you have no respect for your own family. And they were all devouring each other. And it happens, as our caller pointed out, all over the world, repeatedly throughout history. Maybe we can't avoid it. On the other hand, I think there will always be some people out there who are standing for the right thing. And those are the people who can rebuild it later on. Details coming up on a possible effort for that. Story today says that in one part of the country they may be considering going their own way. In other words, breaking away from the dominant culture, which currently seems to be a very, very sick culture. It's 8:34. Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. I'd like to, at least if I could, quickly mention my friend Dr. Eric F. Jones. Actually, could have mentioned himself a few minutes ago. But Dr. Jones has been practicing now since 1993, using a holistic systemic approach to wellness. And when he's talking about families and the breakdown of families, he's spot on because he sees it every day. He has master's and doctoral degrees in marriage and family therapy. Dr. Eric F. Jones uses methods of alternative healing such as naturopathy, medicinal herbs, nutrition, sound waves, intellectual and cognitive self-regulation, and apathy. He's helped remedy and manage your mental, emotional, physical, and your spiritual challenges. You can, by the way, looking for new patients, you can get in touch with him by calling 731-718-7178. Let's start that all over again. Sometimes the tongue gets going faster than the brain. 731-7178. Now, he also has appointments available evenings and sometimes on Saturdays too as well. A couple of locations in Twin Falls. And he's on Facebook at Eric F. Jones, PhD, Mental Health and Wellness Therapist, and that's Eric with a C. This I found this morning at Media Research Center. And I saw it, and I think I heard a couple of rumblings about this not too long ago because Idaho has been one of the states mentioned in this similar type of vein. There's a group that is, and I saw this in one of the national newspapers, there is a group that is trying to bring settlers to northern Idaho. They're calling it the Redoubt. And one of the reasons they say they're settling in northern Idaho is because there's a lack of major highways in the area. And the lack of major highways means no one can come and bother them, other than, I guess, Route 90 cutting across the rooftop. But Idaho has been in that sort of situation before. Some of the people, though, weren't necessarily desired by some of the people already here, but this is a little different. These aren't people who are coming looking for a race war or anything like that. They're just coming because they feel that this is going to be the type of place they'd like to live. They're not moving as much to places like Utah and southern Idaho because they say we have a lot more highways here. And again, they see major highways as being an opportunity for people to bother them. They just want to be left alone. How about this? Support for Texas secession jumps if Clinton wins. This is the headline at Media Research Center. Now, according to a poll, this is done by something called Public Policy Polling, 26% of respondents in Texas, and that's from a small sample, obviously, but polling is fairly scientific today, said they generally support secession, while 59% said they oppose it. And you're thinking, well, okay, there's another group in there, probably about 15%, and apparently they were like, oh, what's that mean? Uh, they're, they're all watching reruns of Jerry Springer, I guess. But 26% is a quarter. Now, that's still a relatively high number. People don't talk about secession a lot in this country, but a quarter of Texans surveyed say that they would support it. However, that number grows. Check this out. When asked whether they would support Texas secession if Clinton is elected president, 40% responded they would support it, while 48% responded they would oppose it. So the number drops to less than half, and we're up to 2/5 when it comes to support. Now, if you have 4 years of Hillary Rotten Clinton destroying America, how high do you think that number is going to go? Now, there's a question to consider. And if Texas, which has already been an independent republic, and so was the state of Deseret, if they all start saying, you know what, we don't want to be part of this debauched culture any longer, we want to go our own way, and we're not going to pay the way to rebuild all of the cities that you people have burned down in other parts of the country. If they go their own way, who will follow? 8:38, Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310, KLIX, and newsradio1310.com. You're up next. You're on the air.
Yeah, good morning, Bill. Your comment, of course, one of the planks of the Communist Manifesto is to destroy the family. And, boy, they've been quite successful and in that regard. And, of course, the Earl Warren Supreme Court in 1962-63 took prayer and Bible reading out of public schools. And, of course, we know what's happened to 10 Commandment monuments and all that kind of stuff. So this is all part of this cultural breakdown. But back to the drug situation, if you remember in the early 60s there, the Beatles came into town. Their main goal was to bring in the drug culture. Mm-hmm. They certainly succeeded. What do you think? Everybody had these cute little songs like, "We all live on a yellow submarine." What is a yellow submarine? Well, it's a methamphetamine. And so this is the drug culture that got brought in primarily with the popularity of the Beatles and other rock groups then sprung up, obviously, and we can see we are bearing the fruit, the harvest from accepting deviant lifestyles and so forth total breakdown of the family, and the fact that what it's 3/4 of the blacks children that are born do not have a father. I think it's somewhere like that percentage. So they've succeeded, especially in not only the black community, but all through our whole culture. And this is, and I think I want to bring up again what Bridget Gabriel said. Christians and everybody, we've got to realize our influence is much greater than we think. Our vote, one call to our senators and congressmen, or an email or whatever, we represent 1,000 people. And Earl Butz said the same thing back in the 60s when I heard him personally. So it might not be quite that, but...
Gonna let you run on that note. I've got a hard break coming up, but agree with that, too. Our last caller referenced in the 1960s when the Beatles arrived. They arrived just at that time when musicians were being elevated to the leaders of our culture, and that's really when our cultural decline started, because we no longer had faith in God or our pastors or military heroes, no longer any faith in our elected leaders. It's or even our fathers. Interesting that he brought that up, because I'm reminded of a comment that was made when John Lennon was killed back in, 1980, 81. Andy Rooney wrote a column afterward about this, and he was, at the time, had a syndicated newspaper column, and pointed out, he said, during the 1960s, I couldn't stand these guys because they encouraged a lot of young people to take drugs, and a lot of those young people ended up dead. Very, very true. And they're still celebrated by the left as being, heroes and, great changes of culture, and look at all the great music they did, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But a lot of it was drug-fueled music. What happened, though, is later, Lennon disavowed all of that and started telling people we were wrong. But he didn't get a very long time to do it because he was killed. And Andy Rooney was bemoaning the fact that here's one guy who was part of that Pied Piper of debauchery, who turned around suddenly and was saying, no, we got it all wrong, and we've got to tell people that now. Now, I'm not saying there was a conspiracy, but it's just unfortunate that he suddenly ended up dying from a gunshot, because he would have been a voice going forward that may have started turning things back in the other direction. Bill Colley with you on Top Story this morning on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. Right now, 64, on our way into the low 90s before the day is over. Telephone number for reaching our program today, 736-0300. That's 736-0300. And I keep reminding you, you have to have your hearing in great shape if you'd like to listen to our program on an appointment basis every day. So we've been recommending Dr. Christine Pickup, a doctor of audiology at Mount Harrison Audiology in Rupert. And she reminds you, with advances in healthcare, people are living longer, healthier lives. However, cognitive decline continues to be a major concern. People with hearing loss have a much greater risk of developing that decline, which can lead to dementia. The greater the loss, the greater the risk. Keeping your hearing healthy is an important part of overall wellness. Knowing your hearing status and doing something about it can lead to a better, healthier life as you age. Now's the time, she reminds you, to schedule a hearing evaluation. You can call Mount Harrison Audiology for an appointment. The telephone number 312-0957. And Dr. Pickup is now the only locally owned and operated hearing center in all of southern Idaho. We have another caller with us at 846. You're on the air on KLIX.
Yes, you were talking earlier about our society and the demise of the white, Christian. And, you say to yourself, well, however it happened, it happened. We are here, and it is what it is. And, when mothers and fathers no longer teach their children, Crosby, Stills, Nash, and but I don't know what they meant, but go ahead and forgive me. But they no longer teach them in what is important, the structure of the family, the history of the country. If you truly want to have the American dream, you've got to maintain capitalism, And so you just, like I said last week, you get to the point where you're depressed and you say, well, what is going to happen? The uncertainty of the future, the anxiety of it, it just haunts me. And you see, I've worked my butt off since 1988 trying to change things. Again, I'm hardly anybody, but I do have 11 children who know better, and my grandchildren know better. And I don't know what it means, but you see, will Trump win? What can he do? Or is election lost? This uncertainty. I know I'm just rambling. I do that a lot. Forgive me. Thanks.
I do it for a couple hours a day. Thank you. I know the feeling. I have a text message from a friend this morning, and he says that Raul Labrador nailed it yesterday when he said if Trump stays on message, he'll turn this thing around. All the latest polls now showing Trump closing again. The strangest thing is media. The polls are coming out now, and a couple of days ago I said it was Zogby. I admitted Zogby isn't always reliable, but now it's the LA Times, and now it's Rasmussen, and so the pollsters are all starting to see Trump closing that gap all over again. And this is despite all of the media efforts to turn around and, take it away from him and give it to their girl Hillary. And there's still some October surprises coming in her case. And I think that everyone says, well, it's already baked in. Everyone knows she's a crook. Well, it's already baked in. Everyone knows what Donald Trump is all about, too. Now, if we discover in some emails that she was playing footsie with some bad people around the world, well, that will move the ball in another direction. And here you go. One of her big allies, George Soros. Daily Caller has this. And speaking of callers, caller, I know you're there. I'll get to you in just a moment. Daily Caller says Open Society Foundations, that is Soros' stated vehicle for progressive social change, orchestrated a well-funded attempt to secure a desired outcome in a U.S. Supreme Court case on illegal immigration enforcement, according to a newly discovered memo between the organization's top U.S. officials and board members. And they were even trying to buy off columnists at the Washington Post who thought they could write columns to try and put pressure on the justices of our Supreme Court. And they were giving them money for that reason. Now, Armstrong Williams, the conservative columnist, nearly had his career ruined 10 years ago when it was said he was getting payments from the Bush White House to write favorably about the Iraqi war. But it's okay if Lefty gets a payment from George Soros. I'm telling you, it's sickening. 10 minutes now from 9 o'clock. You're up next. You're on the air with Bill Colley on KLIX.
Hey, good morning, Bill. It's easy to tell if you look at the things that are happening around the country here, what's going on. Well, I mean, a lot of it anyway, because you look at Hillary Clinton, she's above the law, yet you look what's happening to her, she's not above the law. She's not answerable to man's law, but she is definitely, with this meltdown she's doing, she's answerable to God's law. It's like with the Congress, they made it legal for cops to lie to us, but they can't make it lawful. The question is, who are we going to serve here? Are we going to serve man or are we going to serve God?
Hillary Clinton obviously has answered that question, and you're right. She's going to pay for it at some point.
I think she's paying for it right now. She's pretty much melting down before our eyes.
Well, and thank you for the call. That could be her health issues that we're seeing. But you don't want to hammer people on health issues because Franklin Roosevelt managed to get the job done in a wheelchair for years and years and years. And after the way they savagely attacked John McCain in media, and here the guy is years later still walking around and running for re-election. And you're thinking, none of us knows the hour of our death. Well, I guess in Oregon some people do, but the rest of us, they don't. We don't. But you're right. There could be some sort of divine punishment. And I know liberals out there are going, what are you talking about? Well, you think that God is punishing Hillary Clinton. Well, remember back after 9/11, there was I think it was Pat Robertson and Jerry Falwell were having a conversation on TV. And they mentioned that perhaps that there was some divine judgment in what had happened in this country on 9/11 in the sense, the Old Testament sense, which was that God removes his protection from people who no longer want it. Well, media started saying, Robertson and Falwell are saying that God doesn't like we liberals in America and the culture we've created. Oh, those warped old men. They're claiming God did this to us because we're bad people. No, they were citing, and of course liberals wouldn't know this, they were citing biblical precedent. So yes, indeed, God may have walked away on a day that we needed him. That's what they were saying. And the liberal mindset just doesn't seem to get through to those people. Well, they don't believe in it anyway. I suppose that's the main reason. 8:52. You're on the air. You're up next on KLIX. Go ahead.
Well, when I was talking to preachers, for a long time about making the world a better place, all they ever emphasize on is evangelism. And so I said, okay, after we save everybody's souls, then what do we do? Well, it's just we just go to church and just do that. That's it. That's all I've ever heard from any preachers. For me, going back to the churches isn't going to fix it. Replacing the pastors is the only way we're going to fix it, because most of these guys are now part of the clergy response. They're spying on their own congregation. We can't trust these guys.
What are
I
they?
hate
You
saying
mean
that,
what are they putting bugs in people's homes or something like that?
No, they're being paid by the government to spy on their congregation.
Do you have evidence?
Yes, it's in a bill. I met a lot of these preachers who admitted to it. I've seen all of this.
You're just meeting the wrong preachers, that's all. But thank you much for the telephone call. You're next. You're on the air with Bill Colley on Top Story. Go ahead.
Good morning. I'm just thinking maybe on Trump's commercials, he can put a Darth Vader helmet on Hillary and then play the theme song from Star Wars. She walks in. And he could sell bumper stickers that say, "Help us, Trump Kenobi. Your only hope." Thank you.
He's got to be creative, I would admit that. It would be nice if he'd actually start spending some of his own money on advertising. If he's this close and he's spent very little money, that the political action committees are obviously involved, but if Trump took some of that big war chest and put it into the campaign, I think that he could, because Hillary's people say that their fundraising has become very, very sluggish. So if that be the case, and they've pretty much blown through most of what they've had already, and then Trump suddenly dumps a lot of money in the last couple of months, and the few times he's already done this, I've seen some of these commercials, they've been very witty. I mean, they're very tongue-in-cheek. But they make you laugh, too, as well. But it's the laughter that makes the point that he's trying to bring across. And, he's an entertainer anyway, but it just shows you, it shows you the foibles, the troubles that this woman has, and it underscores them. Coming up on 8:55, Kelton Hatch from Idaho Fish and Game will join us in just a few minutes on News Radio 1310, KLIX, and newsradio1310.com. Speaking of the left and how they try to tell you that their worldview is the only worldview and you can't disagree with them. This is from the Daily Signal today. The facts show Louisiana's floods not caused by man-made climate change. Al Gore claims it's the truth. By the way, he was funded through much of the last decade by Soros as well to make these claims. The New York Times ran a story with the title, "Flooding in the South Looks a Lot Like Climate Change." However, in one study, two researchers at the University of Iowa, specializing in hydroscience and engineering, conclude that over the last 65 years, the stronger storms are not getting stronger, but a larger number of heavy precipitation events have been observed. The larger number of precipitation events, that mean rain and snow, obviously, however, were not a result of burning of conventional resources of energy. The study finds that the climate variability of both the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans exert a large control on the precipitation frequency and magnitude over the contiguous USA. Remember after Katrina? Now, that was 11 years ago in Louisiana. We were told, well, this is what you've wrought with your automobiles and your burning of oil and coal and natural gas, and you need to have renewable. We're all going to chomp granola and sit around in caves and live the rest of our lives, and we'll be happy that way. You've got to get rid of all these things, unless, of course, you're a liberal elite, then you can keep them. And you're going to see a lot more of these devastating hurricanes, and guess what? It hasn't happened. Where are they? And it probably won't flood again in Louisiana now for another 100 years like this. Hello, there were big floods in 1927 and some other years in the last century along the Mississippi, 1993. These things happened. Was there a lot of global warming in 1927? I don't know. I wasn't there at the time, but I'm going to say it probably wasn't anywhere near as critical mass as we claim it is today. Here you go again. It's liberals trying to put in their own worldview over what really is the truth in order to dismantle everything that we've got. First, they kill you off with the drugs. They take your jobs away. They're condescending. They make fun of the fact that you cling to God and guns. And then they tell you can't heat your home or cool your home or drive or do any of those things. It's all part of that grand master plan, apparently. Back in the, it must have been about four summers ago, I was living in that Chesapeake Bay area, and we had a stretch of 100-degree days I mean, it was sweltering with a sticky humidity, and it lasted for about a week and a half. And all of those folks in media were saying, "Oh, you've done it now. This is going to be permanent. This is global warming caused by you, and it's all your fault, you conservative deniers out there." And then the heat wave broke, and the rest of the summer. And by the way, it had been cooler than normal before that heat wave in late June and early July. I mean, it had been downright cold and cloudy all June. And then all of a sudden, the rest of the summer, we barely broke 80 degrees every day. And the following summers came, and guess what? Until this summer, it got a little hot again, but they haven't broken any 100-degree marks. Oh, but they said, "Oh, this is the end. The sky is falling, and it's your fault." Take some more drugs. Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310, KLIX, and NewsRadio1310.com. Kelton Hatch joining us in the next hour from Idaho Fish and Game, right here on News Radio 1310, KLIX, and NewsRadio1310.com.